Manhattan prosecutor leading the Trump witch hunt is now taking action against Congress. Alvin Bragg is suing Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan, as we know, was already taking action towards the Manhattan DA, demanding answers, saying that he might be subpoenaing Alvin Bragg. We've already seen him subpoena Mark Pomerantz and send other letters to other Manhattan lawyers like Matthew Colangelo. Here today, Bragg strikes back, says that he is suing Jordan in a move to block interference in a Trump case. We are going to take a look at this lawsuit. It is a big one. In full here, it's about 50 pages. We'll fly through the meat and potatoes of it, and we'll see what Jim Jordan had to say in response. But first, let's get some background from the New York Times. There is a 50-page lawsuit filed in federal court in the Southern District of New York. Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor at the state level in New York, is suing Jim Jordan in an extraordinary step intended to keep the congressional Republican from interfering in his case. Bragg last week unveiled 34 felony charges against Trump, and we went through the entire indictment and the statement of facts, and I'm still trying to understand how he thinks this is a facially sufficient complaint. Lawyers for Bragg are seeking to bar Mr. Jordan and his allies from enforcing a subpoena sent to Mark Pomerantz, the one that we read through here. Was once the leader of the investigation. Mark Pomerantz was the guy who wrote a book about Trump, resigned in a hissy fit after Alvin Bragg said they were going to wind up the Trump witch hunt prosecution. And then when Alvin stopped getting invited to the cocktail parties, he decided to reinstitute and reinvigorate this zombie case that many people had thought was already dead. Bragg's lawyers, including Theodore Boutros, says that they're going to be trying to prevent any other such subpoenas. Jordan left open the possibility of subpoenaing Bragg. Alvin Bragg versus Jim Jordan in his official capacity as chairman of the judiciary. 50 pages filed April 11th, 2023. Alvin Bragg writes that I bring this action in response to an unprecedentedly brazen and unconstitutional attack by members of Congress. We're prosecuting Donald Trump and Jim Jordan is trying to interfere. He began a transparent campaign to intimidate and attack me, making demands for official confidential documents and testimony from Alvin Bragg himself. And 2 days after Trump was arraigned on 34 counts, Jordan sent a subpoena over to Mark Pomerantz, the former DA who is TDS maximum level 11. The subpoena seeks to compel Pomerantz to testify, and Jordan is seeking highly sensitive and confidential information about a case to which he does not belong. They say basic principles of federalism and common sense forbid Congress from demanding it. Congress, he argues, has no power to supervise criminal prosecutions, nor does Congress have the power to serve subpoenas for personal aggrandizement of the investigators. Okay, but that's not what they're saying they're doing here. We've seen the January 6th committee come up with all sorts of reasons for demanding and subpoenaing evidence. One of those reasons was about how to codify laws about future presidential actions and codify laws about the transition of power. Congress can make laws about anything they want, basically. We have the Supremacy Clause, and when you juxtapose that with the Commerce Clause that has been interpreted to give them power to do anything, they can do whatever they want. So this is not just for personal aggrandizement. All they've got to do essentially is come up with any rational basis and connect it to that. They've done that. We've read all the letters here. Yet that's what Jordan's trying to do. No, he's trying to ask questions in particular about why you seemingly are going after the leading presidential candidate in this country after other prosecutorial agencies have declined to do this. He's perfectly allowed to do that. We know that election interference is a big issue for the Democrats. They've used that as a predicate for doing all sorts of things. Why can't the Republicans do it too? He and his allies have stated that they want him to explain himself and come up with a good argument for this. And they're going to ask him about his prosecutorial activities. But subpoenaing a former line prosecutor is an affront to sovereignty, they say, which is hilarious. They are now 10th Amendment advocates in New York. This is amazing. Alvin Bragg, wait a minute, state sovereignty, states' rights, baby. Okay, he has no power under the Constitution. All of this should have been copied and pasted over to Liz Cheney because they used these same principles for themselves. He gives us a little bit of law saying the Constitution limits certain things, says that the charges filed against Trump were approved by the citizens of New York. They did their duty. and Trump is entitled to challenge these. But rather than allowing the criminal process to proceed, they say that Congress is interfering, participating in a campaign of intimidation, retaliation, and obstruction. DA Bragg, therefore, brings this action to make the argument that this committee and their subpoena is plainly unconstitutional. He says, first, the subpoena served on Mr. Pomerantz is invalid and unenforceable. It has no legitimate legislative purpose. Totally disagree with that. The January 6th Select Committee has come up with all sorts of legislative purposes that were all upheld. In fact, many of the courts have said, we don't even care what their interpretation of their legislative purpose is. As long as they can articulate one, good enough for us. Because what good is it to have the courts substitute their decision-making for the legislature, right? Otherwise, the courts become the legislature. If Congress says, we think this has a legislative purpose and we're going to go investigate it, and the courts say, well, we don't think that's a legislative purpose, so you can't go do that thing. Aren't you kind of giving the courts the legislative branch? Because the courts can just say, well, we just disagree with that. No, you can't investigate that. You can't investigate that or that. It's not legitimate. And that's how the January 6th committee got away with all sorts of stuff, because the courts wouldn't step in. So they claimed that sending demands for Sean Hannity's text messages, a private citizen who's not under investigation by the DOJ, was legitimate, and they could do all of these different things, and everybody complied. And they did it because they were investigating, preventing the next insurrection. Well, we can investigate the prosecution of political opponents in America. Congress can do whatever they want. They set the precedent, not me. I don't think it's good precedent, but it's theirs. They manifestly, he says, it fails all of the Supreme Court tests. I think this is mostly nonsense. He says, second, even if Chairman Jordan were able to demonstrate a valid legislative purpose, which he already has, he's already submitted that multiple times, saying that we have questions about presidential prosecutions and federal funds is another congressional issue. Even Alvin Bragg confirmed that he knows that they use federal funds in the Trump prosecution. So Congress has all sorts of fingerprints that they can latch onto here. He writes, in sum, Congress lacks any valid legislative purpose to engage in a free-ranging campaign of harassment. It's legitimate legislative oversight. If the January 6th Select Committee wasn't harassment and a prosecution of political enemies while they were putting fake witnesses up on the stand to lie to America, this certainly isn't. This is much lower than anything that the J6 committee was doing in terms of depth and scope. They call this campaign a direct threat to federalism. They care about states' rights now. And the court should enjoin the subpoena and end this constitutionally destructive fishing expedition, protect New York, and stop them from interfering in our activities. Jim Jordan responding to Alvin Bragg and Bragg's lawsuit.
They're obstructing our investigation, Brett. We have a constitutional duty to get to the facts, particularly when you have a district attorney interfering with the most important election we have, which is the election of the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. And understand what happened here. Alvin Bragg used federal funds to indict a former president for no crime, and then when we ask questions about it, when we want to investigate, he takes us to court. And he takes us to court because we want to talk to someone who left the DA's office a year ago, who went out and wrote a book on this very subject, did all kinds of interviews, was pushing to go after President Trump before he got there, while he got there, when he left, he wrote a book about it, and we're not allowed to talk to him to do our duty. They're obstructing our constitutional duty to do oversight.
We see something interesting happening in the filings. Apparently, Alvin Bragg may have forgotten to attach a very important document to his filing. After Alvin Bragg submitted his lawsuit against Jim Jordan into the courts for the Southern District of New York, we got a new order that just got submitted in response to the lawsuit. The judge says, all right, everybody, this action was commenced this afternoon. Alvin Bragg filed a complaint and also an accompanying motion. She says the moving papers reference a declaration of Theodore Boutros, but the court doesn't have that document yet, nor is it on the docket. And the court also has not been provided with a copy of the subpoena purportedly served on Mr. Pomerantz. The court declines to enter the restraining order and order to show cause. It's hereby ordered that plaintiff Alvin Bragg must serve the defendants with a complaint and a copy of this order and any supporting papers before 9 p.m. tonight. It's further ordered that any response by by the defendants, Jim Jordan, shall be submitted by April 17th. The court will hold a hearing on April 19th. Signed by Judge Mary Kay. Interesting. It looks like Alvin Bragg submitted his filing and forgot to include the attachments. Don't you hate when that happens? Uh-oh. The declaration of his key witness, Theodore Boutros, and the subpoena support that needed to be served on Mr. Pomerantz, also not included. Uh-oh. Having a tough time filing there in federal court, which is not unsurprising given the fact that based on the indictment we read, he also has a difficult time drafting indictments.